Time is up.
Thank you, ma'am. Good morning. It's 10 o'clock and this is Sue Rogers here. I'm gonna call this meeting, this workshop meeting of the Southport Planning Board to order. I ask that everyone silence or turn off their cell phones, me included. I'll make sure that. Thank you. We will start. Hey, Will, come on. We didn't wait on you, sorry. We'll start as always with those who can. Will, please stand for an invitation to be here in time to pray. We need it, we need that, and then we'll follow with our allegiance, folks. Thank you, Will.
Our Father, we thank thee for allowing us to come together this day and in this part of thy kingdom on this beautiful day and do the things that we must to hopefully better our community. We're so very thankful for all that thou gives us, and we ask a blessing upon these proceedings, that we would have the wisdom and hear the words that could guide us in the direction that we need to travel. And we're so very grateful for all that thou gives us. And we ask these things humbly in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item G is the approval of the agenda. Members were issued this in advance of the meeting. Because our subject today is new for so many to town, and because we're not bound to allow public comment in workshops, I asked Mo to revise the agenda for item E to be public comment today, because we said at our April 17th meeting that we would accept comment. So do I hear a motion to approve the agenda as revised?
So moved.
Thank you, Will, and a second.
Second.
Thank you, Larry. There's a motion on the floor. Any final discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. So item E now is public comment. Our meeting on April 17th was the first look that Southport citizenry had on the waterway development plan, having been under negotiation by city leadership and the developer for well over a year. And let me qualify that by saying, when I say city leadership, I always mean the whole of leadership, not one particular person, but the whole of our council manager form of government here in Southport. So do I hear a motion, please, to move into public comment?
So moved. And second.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Motion is on the floor. Any final discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you so much. Passes unanimously. Madam Deputy Clerk, do we have anyone signed up to speak?
No, ma'am, we do not.
Do we have anything e-submitted?
We do not, ma'am.
Thank you. Anyone here this morning that would want to address the board but did not sign up, you're welcome to speak. Seeing none, do I hear a motion to end public comment?
So moved. And second.
And a second. Thank you so much. Motion on the floor. Any final discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, gentlemen. That makes item F then. The only items on our agenda is further discussion of the waterway development residential CZ text amendment, rezoning application, and the associated development agreement. All of this will be based on the information received at our April 17th meeting and what Mo has updated us with our packet and what has come to you this morning at your places. We had good conversation and many questions there. Some were able to be answered by staff and some were not. We're going to start on page 2 of our packet with that zoning text amendment. I'll note that we also have the development agreement in this packet again, and that starts on page 105. And we had begun some discussion of that on the 17th. We inquired about having a rep of the legal firm or the development attorney with us, but staff refused that on April 23rd as, quote, not currently the best use of our resources, unquote. Some members, I think, have forwarded questions, and I hope we'll cover some of those here. I want to say this zoning text amendment is the greater of our responsibilities in this total submission. Though, as we noted on April 17th, the three elements are very much intertwined. I continue to believe that we've already done a big service to the city's citizens by bringing this submission into the sunshine and making folks aware of the process that's been underway for some time. Before we get into the meat of the submission, anybody else have general comments or any questions? Okay. So Mo, can you take us into the text that East, West, and Ballhead had prepared? And since everyone here or watching may not have access to all we have, tell us how their text that starts on page 2 is different than what city staff had prepared for the board in 2023, which starts on page 34 of your packets. Other than, obviously, the 2023 document is way more detailed. While you go through this too, Mo, the UDO review committee, I think that the comment, everybody got these, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. As we go through these, where they've made suggestions for text, John, since you kind of crafted this for us, got this out for distribution. Can we hit on those as we go through those for
Yes.
those reviews and suggestions? Thank you, Shirley.
All right, good morning, Chair and members of the board. We will be going through the language. I have the same presentation that I have prepared for the April 17th, so I have all of those slides available. I don't think we need to go through every specific slide, but I have those available for you if you'd like to speak, like me to show you any of those at the time. The first section we're going to talk about is the text amendment. These are two separate, while they are grouped together and they're coupled together as part of the overall development itself, the text amendment itself is a standalone request by the applicant, and it will be incorporated into the UDO. That will be able to be used by anyone at this point. So once it's incorporated into UDO, it's not just specifically for this property. The process that they have proposed is for any development project that would come forward wanting to use conditional zoning. So,
But the use tables,
the use
that
table,
it separates it
That's
out to
correct.
them
That's
because
right.
it's CZ-1
Yes.
that would be specific to their.
that's correct. So then that second portion that has their own use standards and dimensional standards is the conditional rezoning itself. So it's using this proposed text amendment that allows the process to then come forward as a new rezoning, as conditional zoning 1. So that's the difference between the two. But yes, they're kind of hand in hand, but I want it very clear that once this language is approved, it can be used by any property owner throughout the city. So not just the property, etc. So that is definitely something that I want to clarify. I did want to. I believe it is, yes. Oh, okay. So, what is conditional zoning? It's tailored zoning for smart growth. And I was asked to kind of give just a small one sentence kind of putting it together. What is it? So, conditional zoning is a land regulation process where a property is rezoned with specific conditions or restrictions tailored to a proposed development. So every standard or condition is only for that property and that development itself. So unlike standard or conventional zoning, it allows flexibility by permitting changes to the dimensional standards. Design, building design, we are allowed to have some building design and architectural design requirements that could be part of this conditional use. Use limits, what uses are and are not allowed to be, kind of traffic improvements. There's a lot of different things that can be incorporated that you can't ask for in a traditional rezoning. So those all have to be met and agreed upon by the community as well as the applicant. So that is kind of just a nutshell what conditional zoning is. It's the process, not the use standards that are being proposed with the application here. So today, as is in the UDO, conditional zoning is only allowed in the non-residential zoning districts, and they must be tied to existing zoning districts, dimensional standards, and use allowances. So if you have a piece of property that is zoned business district, the uses that are allowed in business district are only uses you're allowed to bring forward in your proposal, and you have to keep the dimensional standards. So setbacks, height, any landscaping, so those all have to still be in there. So it's really not as flexible as conditional zoning overall is proposed to be. So that's what we have today. So we have noted that the House Bill 911 removed our extraterritorial jurisdiction. So the law of our zoning jurisdiction in the ETJ has really changed a lot of things, are now only allowed to look at zoning in our corporate limits. And also the authority to have condition down zoning has been removed as well, Senate Bill 382. So that means that a government cannot propose or adopt any ordinance or map changes that would decrease the density allowances, the uses that are allowed in those zoning districts, and it created any non-conformities. You could not change your ordinance. So that's very limiting on what you can do and what could be. So it's hindering the ability. So conditional zoning, allowing that process to be approved and allowed in the city, will give us the opportunity to work with developers and applicants saying, this is what we would like to do, and we can ask for some give and take back and forth so that we can say, well, we want increased buffers, or we want increased setbacks for certain areas, which we couldn't ask for now. So I can, if you like, go through what they have proposed, and then we can look at kind of some of the differences of what was in that. Okay. So the applicant proposed a kind of a very slimmed down change of the conditional zoning. Very, very slim down. So the purpose is essentially not changed. So it's basically saying that the conditional zoning allows the regulations to be imposed on the area. It's particular to the site and its context. And I'm looking at page 3 of your packet. Just we'll be following this this slide here. So it's saying you can achieve things refining the existing general use zoning districts with the new conditional zoning district, and where appropriate, the development agreement may provide further certainty and greater flexibility in the planned unit developments that we have initially.
But can I interrupt you just a second? So on page 34 of our packet is what was originally.
Yes, and I was, well, this was what was, brought forward at the January, February 2024 meeting that was ultimately denied by the Board of Water. Yes. So what I just went through for this purpose, and then and I'll go through the requirements and conditional requirements. These are the applicant's proposal. So no zoning proposal shall be considered in the open space zoning district. And then the dimensional standards within the conditional zoning district shall be designated by the applicant and set forth in Appendix A submission requirements. So for the original, it's laid out a little bit different, but it the allowance of where they can be considered is the same. So the one that was proposed, it was still no requests in the open space, but all other zoning districts were opened up for that one. Dimensional standards were going to be proposed by the applicant so that they weren't restricted to the underlying zoning district any longer. Some of the differences are there was a required pre-application meeting prior to the applicant moving forward, so they could come in, speak with staff, find out what they want to do, so we can start the negotiation process and what's going to be going on with that. So that's one difference. Also, the only dimensional standards that were restricted was the maximum height could not be any higher than the current zoning district for the property. So that was the one dimensional standard that had to be followed for the underlying, and all others were able to be changed to whatever they would like to propose. So as long as you kept the same height limits that was required in whatever zoning district you were in, let's say I had a R10 tract of land, I could make my height limits would be restricted to 40 feet. So that's the difference. So now it's opened up that height can be considered as a change. That is one difference. Density is proposed with conditional zoning for review for conformance with all adopted plans. That too will be considered by staff when they're bringing forward the density. So any rezoning, you have to make sure it's consistent with any of your land use plan and also any other adopted plans that you have. That would be the UDO and any other planning documents that we may have in the future. So that is where we are. So with this, so even this application that we have next item, those densities have been considered to make sure that they are consistent with the future land use map of the existing adopted Canton land use plan. So that doesn't change. It's not necessarily written in this language, but it is required, and it will be considered as any other zoning change request would be.
And it's not a bad thing on the city's part not to have that spelled out in here.
Yes, because 160D as well as our UDO, which any applicant has to still follow the processes within the UDO. So the conditional zoning is just one portion of it, but you still have to follow all of the other process requirements, such as the consistent, like how a rezoning is brought through the
The
system.
statute's gonna override whatever we have anyway, so that it would have to be followed.
Yes, yes. So, and as in the video, it's outlined, the planning board has to make a recommendation to the board of aldermen. That process of a rezoning still has to be followed, even though it does not say it explicitly.
We did not put it in here.
Yes.
Okay.
The other big ones that are different. Density. Uses with their specific standards or both match. The other one is that they need conditional rezoning in a residential. This is one from staff. Had to be at least a 5-acre tract. And it had to be contiguous. Where this doesn't give a minimum acre size and doesn't say that the land has to be contiguous. It just has to be all of the property owners, if they're not the same property owner, have to agree upon this situation with proposals for the standards. The public input meeting, that is included in the applicant's proposed language. Staff make sure to include that because that is very important. We want to make sure that the public is aware of what's happening and has the opportunity to speak with the applicant, get answers, and then that report has to be brought back to staff, which will be included in the recommendation from the planning board to the board of aldermen.
And that was something,
That would be included in the
kudos to you. That was something that got inserted in that after this originally came in, because it wasn't there from the applicant. Thank you, Mo, for seeing to that.
And the only difference with that one is this. The public input meeting and staff's recommendation originally was it had to happen prior to the application was submitted. Whereas in the one that is written now, it just has to happen prior to the public hearing and submittal to the board of aldermen. That's the difference. So they can apply for it and then have the public input meeting after that.
Do you consider that a better process for staff determinations, or am I putting you
No,
in
no, no,
that
no,
spot?
no, I'm just thinking, I don't think it's really, it's kind of neutral. I think that it's important to have it. I think it gives the public an opportunity before the public hearing that the Board of Aldermen will be considering. So they'll have the information and all the input from the public. So that way they can incorporate those comments within their recommendation or their final decision after the public hearing.
I'm not trying to put you in
No, no,
that spot.
no.
I want everybody, and then when the recording comes out, to understand these are differences between,
Yes.
and whether or not it benefits the city
Sure,
to
absolutely.
go in this direction with it.
One thing about the public input meeting happening prior to the application is then staff could ask them to incorporate any of those changes that were suggested by the public to make sure that they were in there, in the application itself. So that is the difference. And that is important, but I don't think it's game changer.
Madam Chair, if I could, just a quick point of information. So I understand there's a large difference between what was done in 2023 versus what was done now. And I'm trying to understand if this is really a product that's been negotiated by the mayor and the Board of Aldermen. If this is conditional zoning light, are we losing anything? And was staff involved in the 2023 version as well?
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
yes,
So
Very.
yes, very much so.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just want to understand, I guess, from a 50,000 foot view, why would we lessen and go to conditional zoning light when we had a good package the last time? Is it substantive changes or?
Not particularly except the height,
Yeah.
that's one big one.
Yeah.
The difference is this is an applicant who has brought forward this language.
Right.
And they can ask for what they want.
Okay.
So that's different. So and then what was proposed in 23-24 was brought forward by staff.
Okay.
And that included many public meetings, public
Yeah.
inputs, public hearings, town hall meetings. I mean, there were months and months and months of deliberation to make sure that the language was really tailored for what the community wanted to see, because there was a lot of concern about the guardrails.
Yeah, and I guess my concern is that what the community mentioned in 23-24 is not being incorporated in this package. Is that fair to say? I just want to make sure that the community has a role in this as well. That it's
Yeah.
just not a developer coming in saying, hey, this is what I want, and we're not going to act on it, or at least make some recommendations. I assume we are.
For the text amendment itself? is that-
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Sure.
And anybody with concerns in the alderman's public hearing, right, they would still be able to voice those concerns.
Absolutely.
And have input at that time. And frankly, they could have come today to put public comment
Yes. And
out
they can come to public comment, sure.
at our regular
meeting.
meeting. That's correct.
And they can always, provide written input. I have not received any. So, it's been very quiet, but I think that as people start learning about this and see what happens. But other than what I have just outlined, really those are the differences
Thank you.
of what was proposed by staff originally and then what the applicant here has requested.
As I said before, crickets are chirping loudly. We can hear the crickets over this compared to the last time. I'm just saying.
So, and then the last part of the proposed from the applicant, that must include a master development plan, which is the bubble diagram, kind of giving you the clusters of what's going to be in these areas and the dimensional standards for those. So you're going to get your density, you're going to get your uses. So that's your development plan. It's not a formal site plan. The applicant will still have to go through a major subdivision, preliminary plat and final plat prior to any development occurring. So this is really just the big picture of the development, what to expect, what we're allowing as the uses and kind of where they would be in the vicinity of the land itself. So that is the purpose of the master development plan. That was another thing that we made sure was included so that it wasn't just narrative and we had no idea where and how these densities would work on site and where they wanted to have more of the development itself. That was, so then the effect of the approval is no different than what the staff had proposed.
So through the chair, we only are looking at the Southport portion in our jurisdiction. Regardless of 10 feet over the line, the county, even if it's being annexed in or proposed to be annexed in, we can't combine the two of those for an overall view. That's just Southport.
That's correct.
portion.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So are there any other questions about the proposed amendment of the language itself before I go into appendix A?
So now, we didn't talk about these proposed, from the UDO review committee, the things that they are highlighting.
Well, I wanted to move it to that because that was really very specific to appendix A.
Okay.
Yes. So that's why I wanted to, if there's any other concerns or questions or things that you would want to consider from this language, I'm happy to note it. We can look at it and go from there.
I'll say, I'm a little concerned that this has been compacted so much, from what was drafted before. It may be fine. That's why I was asking, do you have big problems with it? And of course, as a planning board, we can always go back in and make adjustments as the
Correct.
document's fluid, but I just want to make sure from what we're forwarding to the alderman that we're putting enough protections for the city
Sure.
into it too, rather than, I mean, that's kind of the purpose of the whole thing, to make sure that everybody gets the best out of this. So it concerns me a little bit that it's so tiny compared to what we did before.
Yes.
Anyone else?
Okay, all right. So moving forward, the next consideration of this text amendment is appendix A. And appendix A, as it exists in the UDO now, is and appendix A is the outline of the submittal requirements by an applicant. So that is all it is. So it takes the standards from each section of Article 3 and Article 4, which are the zoning administration zoning standards, as well as the subdivision standards that are required for each type of development, and outlines what they need to prepare and have included in their application. So as the table format it is now, it's not very user friendly. It's kind of hard to follow. There are some things that could be better clarified in the language as a narrative rather than a table. So that is part staff proposes appendix A in the narrative form originally. The applicant came back and included some changes on the conditional zoning. And I would like to note that in appendix A now, there is not a listing for what is required for conditional zoning. So it only includes our minor site plans, major site plan, preliminary plats, but it does have the master development plan that's required for PUD. So there's no outline of what is necessary for conditional zoning. I wanted to just kind of give that background of what the appendix A is so that anyone who does not know, as we move forward with the discussion, that Mr. Bove has put together for us. So he had provided some comments on some of the conditional zoning and then further in the appendix A. And would you like me to guide through this? Would you like to guide through it? And can you then open the discussion? However you choose.
How about, so we go back before appendix A.
Yes,
There was
sir.
a couple of things.
Yeah.
As you know, the planning board, or at least the UDO committee of the planning board has development bonds, stormwater bonds on the radar. So there's some references in here, we're not get specific, but references to bonding should be, in my opinion, in the UDO text. And if they don't apply, they don't apply, but we don't want to come back and try to add to it. So there, in my opinion, so there's several of these comments in here, and I won't hit all of them, but let's see. There is reference, and this is just prior to appendix A, and it's in the draft 211A. I'm sorry, 211B, effective approval, where it says basically we're removing a lot of language, but it applies anyway, even if not explicitly. And in the package, that's at the bottom of page 4, and it's shaded green. I guess my question was, what are we referring to? What kind of language?
Okay, so those are when I was speaking on
The draft.
the draft itself, that is, that the applicant's proposed, doesn't incorporate any of the 160D procedures, any of the procedures that are required by the UDO that are in the staff's proposal originally. So just because those do not exist in this language does not mean that they don't have to meet them. So they still have to meet those requirements regardless. And that was, when I asked about why they were taking some of this out, they said, well, it's covered in the process in 160D. So why we didn't want to put it in. So that was the answer I got when I asked that. Yes.
Who gave you that?
The applicant, yes.
And that's why I wonder why, if we shouldn't, I mean, I'm not saying the whole thing needs to be incorporated from before, but I mean, should we make some reference to that's where it's covered?
And we
We see
could.
why.
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
right?
Yes. And there is, in the language, there is a reference to 160B. Yes.
Our,
Oh,
in
well,
the
in
prior.
the proposed, so on page 4 of the packet says, the request will be filed, reviewed, and acted on in accordance with procedures set forth in section 210 of the UDO text and zoning map amendments, and subject to the procedures and requirements of the North Carolina General Statutes 160D 703B. And then prior to the public hearing, the rezoning applicants must conduct the input meeting and file report. So that's where they have kind of encapsulated in that one paragraph a lot of the process. Now, if there's something specific you would like to have me take back to the applicant to consider, I'm happy to do that for the zoning language itself.
Well, thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, that is covered in that. And Mo, again, not putting you on the spot. Do you feel this is sufficient for us? Does I'm assuming that attorneys have looked at this, both for the city, obviously they have for the applicant. And everybody's hunky-dory with this.
They find that it covers everything that needs to be covered for the process. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so now, John, you at the top of this page that is with our page 4 here, this is where we talk about bonding. Obviously, you're right, this has become something that's a sticking point in the city for a few areas that were developed. So we had bonding in the past.
Correct. Yeah, we did. We had bonding, we allowed bonding prior to 2020 when the new UDO was adopted. So right now, we prohibit the request for financial guarantees or performance bond period. So until that language is changed, we can't incorporate any bonding requests otherwise.
What was the rationale behind it?
That was because several of our subdivisions, the developers just left. Didn't finish the installation, even though we had bonds, but then it just lagged on for so long, the bonds were not enough money, they didn't cover the improvements. They didn't get the improvements made, they just kind of left the HOA high and dry. So the process, as it was, wasn't working, so so the thought was, if we don't have bonding, before they get their final plat, every part of the infrastructure has to be completed. So they can't come in and say, well, we'll finish our stormwater in the next year and we've got this bond to cover it. Or we're gonna wait to put our sidewalks in until each house is built, but if that doesn't happen, we still have this bond, well, now they're gonna have to put all of the improvements in prior to any final plat.
So the decision was made, it's a headache, it's not effective, so let's just eradicate it. And then since then, has any research been done to determine what other municipalities have done where it is effective? And how they have graduated performance bonds where they increase over time based upon the status of the project? I think John knows more about that.
Sure. And that is something that staff has been working towards, to look kind of into some best management practices for the bonds themselves. So I think that we're a good conversation started with the UDO committee, but without having the language allowing us to ask for this, we cannot ask that, so.
Why can't you? Why can't you ask for a bond in here as part of conditional zoning?
I can take that back to the attorney and see if there's a way.
If we're negotiating,
Yes.
if we're negotiating
Sure.
standards, why not negotiate that in?
But most of the time, the standards still have to be things that are allowed by the UDO itself. So you can change the dimensions of
Gotcha.
the things.
One
but it's
isn't
still
above the
allowed.
other.
Yes, right. But I will follow up.
Thanks.
Great, thank you.
So I guess the suggestion was to say that the bonding is consistent with the existing zoning district.
Right,
So if there is no bonding,
right.
that's fine, but at least you have a language in here for when you change or when stormwater gets added.
Yes,
And, you know, any covenants or bonds associated with that get added.
right.
And again, I'm not just looking at this application, it's,
Yeah.
you know, all the future ones
Yes,
as well. So if there's a way to wedge that in there, that's still
sure.
legal, I
Yeah.
guess.
Absolutely.
Well, that's fine. So in the package, in, I guess, starting on page 7, there is development principle. And there is principles and a bunch of policies that are all numbered sequentially, so I didn't count how many there were. Are we comfortable that those policies and principles are incorporated in this CD process? In other words, these principles aren't part of the text itself, right?
They are not, no.
So that it's not reading the policies, he's got to find out about it somehow.
Well, the applicant does have to show how that their request and their proposal is consistent with the land use plan. So they will be looking at the land use plan for consistency, showing how. And then staff will also be looking at policy and making their recommendation based on looking at policy as well. So these policies that were outlined are just ones that help support the consideration of conditional zoning, not the project itself, so that these are where we would be going to look to see if things are consistent.
So is this something that in a pre-application meeting, for instance, staff could lay out these policies and say this is what we're looking for?
Yes.
Okay, so because they don't appear in any of the text, right? This is just background.
That's right. Yes, so this is just supporting the conditional zoning text amendment steps. So we have these policies that say we want to have smart growth principles and we want to be able to allow flexibility and neighborhood connectivity. And those are the types of things that can be accomplished with conditional zoning that we don't allow now. So we don't have it in our zoning ordinance that will allow a cluster subdivision or small lots. So we're really restricted to the dimensional standards that we have right now.
So what, John, what you're asking is, should we incorporate those principles somehow in our text amendment? Or just use these as discussion points with these applicants? And if that's the case, how will we know we did this with every applicant?
Right.
Right. Well, and I'm not suggesting adding this to the
Sure.
text because I'm sure there's
There's-
other
And it won't
principles.
always apply to every
Right.
request.
Everyone.
Right. Yeah.
But it goes back to that pre-application meeting. If that was I think they're good ideas and a lot of times I just think they're a good idea too. So this pre-application meeting is when you sit down with the developer and show them the policies and say, our review is going to be colored by these principles and these policies. So that they don't find out about it after they apply.
And again, one of the application questions is how does this, this request that you're bringing forward is how is it consistent with the adopted land use plan? So they will have to outline that as well. And then the planning board as well as the board of aldermen have to sign your consistency statement, which says we have reviewed this application, looked at it and make sure that it is consistent with our ordinances, consistent with our land use plan. And so staff will be looking at these and making our determination as a part of our recommendation to the boards.
Not necessarily
That's
taking
exactly.
their exact wording into it, but establishing as part of our procedures in that meeting that we're gonna be talking to them about basically what we expect the guiding principles to be throughout all of this.
Yes.
I mean, my intention is that the staff does the hard work and not. the board.
Right, yes, yeah.
That's right.
I heard a motion.
Speaking truthfully.
Okay, so we might revisit that pre-application meeting as something we might want
As
to.
it gets, as we develop all of this more.
Right. It's just, it's an opportunity to knock all this stuff out before there's a formal application.
And while we don't, most applicants do come in prior because they want to know what they can and can't do. So yes, we can require it, but honestly, most people do come in and say, what have I got? What can I do? And while we can't tell them what to do per se, but we can help guide them on different options that they may have.
Right, yeah, I mean, you can show the
Absolutely. Yeah.
policies and.
So that's something that you want to think about.
And I've inserted stormwater
Yeah.
part, just make sure every time we talk about land use, that stormwater's included in there because, this is a larger parcel. It may not apply to, a 1 acre CZ so much, but this is big enough that we want to make sure that as we develop stormwater or improve the stormwater UDO, that it gets incorporated into the,
Yes.
into this application that we're kind of thinking about.
And what I would like to say that I absolutely agree with that. We want to make sure everything's done. The conditional rezoning package is really looking at the dimensional standards and the uses. And when you get to your preliminary plat, your subdivision itself is where they are required to submit their stormwater plans. But I'm happy to see if we can add that in just to make sure that that's on the forefront of people when they're looking.
Right, because, as we talked about with the stormwater UDO, that could influence other dimensional standards.
Sure, absolutely.
Especially on smaller lots. So moving it up front here means you have to consider the stormwater before you start.
Sure.
Before you get to the plat.
I think that's a good suggestion to put that in there, Mo, just because I had to be addressing stormwater here lately too, haven't we? And so it's a good thing just to kind of nudge to say that we take that seriously too, right?
Absolutely, yes.
I think this comes up a couple times, and we had talked about this a little bit yesterday. I think a development schedule at this stage
Right.
would be good for reference For instance, if it's going to take 10 years to develop, that assists the staff in looking at stormwater and the aldermen looking at, whatever the aldermen, want to see out of this, whether it's, revenue or,
Right. And they can forecast what it
yeah, and it's not a commitment.
Implements, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. Yes, it gives just an overall view. I think that's a great idea too, John, to have something in there. Plus the public's gonna be able to see up front
Right.
how long it's gonna take for
That's right.
something
That's
to be
right.
done.
And we understand the schedules can change. but,
Sure.
Absolutely.
Is this a 1-year project or a 10-year project?
Yeah.
That influences
Right.
a lot of what you need to do.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And I guess I don't really need to do for every one of these. If you want to.
Well, I have no problem with you doing that. Where y'all suggested something be looked at, I think it's a good thing to get it on record, actually, Joey.
Okay. Well, some of the comments apply to the later sections, minor site plan, major site plan. I think a definition or reference to the UDO that defines major and minor site plan would be helpful. And then, again, references to schedules and stormwater,
Sure.
impervious surface, so I'll just carry those comments through.
Sure.
And I guess and I asked you this yesterday, so I'll ask it again. The tabular format of Appendix A is in the UDO, is that being revised or are we just
Yes, so
revising?
this
Appendix
would provide the whole table and make it this document, this portion of the document. So they added a conditional zoning portion, and then we're incorporating the whole thing so it all matches. So you'll have just the narrative as Appendix A, and the table will be removed.
Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah, anything else specifically?
Perfect.
Appreciate it.
Well, before we move on, I just want to reiterate that the table we're talking about is Appendix A, not the table of uses. So that's going to remain, this is about the submitted requirements for applications only. And when anyone confused with that one, okay. She's going to remove the table of uses.
And I think it is a good idea, and I think we talked about this prior, to make that much easier to understand.
And there were a couple of things that weren't in that list on the table that were missing, especially the traffic impact
Yes.
analysis was missing. So if you weren't aware of really what you needed to do, you could miss it, very easily and then have to backtrack. And so we want to have everything up front for everyone. Thank you. So as we mentioned at the last meeting, our opportunities here are that the current allowances for conditional zoning that we have just for our non-residential uses are very restricted. There's really not any incentive for people to use this conditional zoning. And the PUD process also has deficiencies because we can't meet the smart growth principles. And it really does, it says your plots have to be a certain size, a certain width, and it really doesn't give the flexibility for us to ask for, more open space, or making sure that you're not building around these wetlands, or making sure that a grove of sand, or trees are saved so that, and then letting you have some smaller lots over here. So we can do that with conditional zoning, but with the PUD, people kind of have to spread it out as possible to make sure that they get the most out of the property, so. And that is it on the conditional zoning text portion. I have my notes from discussion, but if there's anything you would want me to make sure that I included or brought back for your regular meeting, please let me know. Or you can follow up with me after the meeting, absolutely.
I don't know if at the proper time, you tell me if this is, if you want to address this later. I'm looking at, this is a current House bill,
Right.
765. And I printed out version 2. They talk in that bill, they talk about conditional districts and what can and cannot be done.
Yes.
We all love how they're
Yes.
picking everything
Yes.
apart right now, right?
Man.
And I don't, you may not, and I'm happy to give this one to you, but they talk about conditions and site-specific standards imposed in a conditional district shall be limited to those that address the conformance of the development and use of the site to local government ordinances 160D, and impacts reasonably expected to be generated by the development or use of the site. I'm wondering what this, and it's supposed to be effective October 1st.
Right.
How much of this will knock in the head what we're talking about doing,
Right.
and how it could actually impact, I guess this may be part of the applicants
Yeah.
urging to get this done quickly, and I understand they want to do marketing, this has been
Sure,
short while for them, but I'm wondering if this is, if you look at that deal.
Well, what I can remember from that deal is it's really giving the developer, the applicant more. Where it's taking away the flexibility for the community to come forward and say, well, that's great, but we'd love you to do this. And some of the big ones, the architectural design features is one that they're taking away. So I think that's a big one. And I think that's one that a lot of times we see applicants coming in, even for major site plans, and my gosh, I really wish we could do something about this design, the architecture of the building. We have no authority to do that. So that's one of the big ones, that if they come through with conditional zoning, we can say, right now, as it stands, we can say, we want it to look this, and please provide these options. So that, I would say, big. So it's really giving the applicant more ability to move forward how they choose.
But if you will, because you're gonna know more about all these more, and I just printed out a portion of that bill. Obviously, bills are big.
Yeah.
765.
Yeah.
Just look at that for us, maybe by the time we get back together to see what we're proposing, if we're proposing any changes.
Okay.
How that might impact
Sure.
what we're talking about there. There's no reason to beat a horse too terribly much once it lays down to die, right?
Yeah.
So, just if we could just look at that to see what impacts that might have for either entity in it. Thank you, ma'am.
Well, I have just some educational questions.
Sure.
Maybe. So when you're looking at this, what about how is open space determined versus this text versus prior?
So this is one of those standards that the applicant will bring forward. Let's say they're going to PUD, they're required to do 20% open space. And that does not include jurisdictional wetland, and some other things, but mainly jurisdictional wetlands. So we already have that in our UDO. So now this opens up the ability for them to propose how they're going to calculate open space. So they're, like as proposed, their open space is going to be including wetlands, marina basement. So those types of things. So it really, that is a change.
Is that a favorable change or non-favorable change? So Because it's limiting the amount of open space.
That's correct. It is. So I would say that it's definitely challenging for the city because we want to be able to provide as much open space that's not already can't be developed. So this can never be developed. So why is it considered open space? And that's how we have our ordinances now. It's in addition to the required.
Okay, is there going to be any pushback on that calculation? Is there, you know,
There has not been.
and also about landscaping.
Yes.
You know, in the prior text amendment back in 2024, there was a lot of language of toxic materials. It was probably about 5 categories of what they couldn't do when they were in construction. And this one is very, they put up a protective barrier around machinery or tools.
Right.
Why has that been reduced? Why isn't there more teeth with regard to protecting the existing trees and landscape versus the same as we had before?
Well, I think that, I mean, we're talking very specifically about the application, but there is a tree removal portion of their request that does outline and their architectural review committee board portion of the agreement, but it outlines the mitigation that they have to do one for different sizes of trees. They, you know, they have to make sure that they're placing their development or whatever they are building in the most place that is most beneficial, that won't impact any of the vegetation. So there, it is there. We just have to make sure that as we move forward with any new applications, that the tree preservation is included in the standards. Yes.
Yeah, because, you know, it talks about traffic studies and other
Yes,
things.
yes.
And so they can even do their own study to substitute in parking around the marina.
Yes.
That gives a lot of freedom.
That's common. That is a common, yes, yes.
Because I'm just wondering where the city negotiates, how much finalizing this, because we're talking about that, I mean, not just for them, but for the whole
Right.
community. The reality is, who else is going to use it other than this development? We don't have that much space left.
Oh, that's more than you think.
Oh, and this is just a curious question. And I remember from one of the hearings from the last time, there was this little young girl who went up, she was like 12 years old, and she was asking about the impact on the wildlife.
Sure.
And was there ever an environmental study done as far as the impact on the species around the marina, as far as the type of wildlife, the birds, reptiles?
There's not, no. And an environmental study like that is not something we could ask for. We could ask for how they're preserving some of their vegetation to keep the habitat, but having a true environmental study like, I mean, that's not really simple.
But there are some steps you can take to.
Yes, there are, yes.
And you can take those.
I can ask, yes.
Okay. That's all we can ask.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are you ready for me to move forward today? All right, everybody else. Wonderful. All right, so next item is the conditional zoning map amendment request by the applicant. So this is an applicant initiated zoning. The properties they're considering are zoned R10 and land use development or PUD to conditional zoning. The planning board will be presenting the recommendation to the board of Alderman, and they will have their public hearing and make the final decision as in any other zoning on that amendment. So this proposal is 19 lots within the area around the marina of Indigo Plantation subdivision that exists now. So some parking lots that are off Indigo Drive, the marina itself, and then a parcel of land to the north off of 9th Street that is contiguous to the county portion of the property. So those is what we're going to be looking at. It's 47.61 acres, full acreage of the property consideration. Future land use map says that it's a medium density residential, which is approximately 4 units per acre. This is just your vicinity map that we have seen before to show where these properties are located in relationship to the city itself, downtown, and some of the other subdivisions in the city. These are the parcels that they're situated within Indigo Plantation subdivision. And again, like I said, it's the parking lot, vacant Indigo Plantation Drive, and the marina are the bottom portion, the middle portion of the area of Indigo Drive that is just an empty parking lot that used to be there for the ferry itself. And then again, the northern portion is with it contiguous off of 9th Street to the county property itself.
So does that, just for reference,
Yes, ma'am.
is that at the hard left? Going down 9th at the school?
No, well, that one portion of that is at the hard left. So the portion above, that we're talking about, the most northern portion that's contiguous to the county portion, that's off 9th Street is further north across the street from the school itself, prior to making those turns. And the applicant has submitted their master development plan. And as you'll note, the purple areas are the marina area, and that is approximately 4 acres. And that's going to include non-residential or mixed uses in that area with a maximum of 10,000 square feet of non-residential. The red area is the waterfront village. And this is a 4-acre area as well, and that's going to be all multifamily. So there's going to be no duplexes or townhomes. It's going to be all true multifamily dwellings there. So like they're calling multifamily buildings. So I would say those are going to be like condos and those types of things. And then as you go north, the orange portion of the master development plan is your residential village. And that's going to be your mix of townhomes, duplexes, and small cluster lots, the area. And that is approximately 21 acres there.
And all of this used to be in years past. Was it PUD down in that area?
So that is all PUD once you get into Indigo Plantation.
The or the
Yes.
zoning that kind of went away, for lack of a better term, as it sat undeveloped,
That's
right?
right,
It
yes.
had time limitations to
Yes.
that, correct?
So now they're just building to the density that they propose as well as consistent with the land plan. So their overall density is just over 4 units per acre, which is in line with what the future land use map requires. So again, this outlines the density definitions, the number of dwelling units per area. Units of land area, this is going to be your gross land, so this is not removing any of the wetlands or any of the open space, this is just the gross amount of land per units per acre for that. The residential density, like I mentioned, is just over 4, it's about 4.2 dwelling units per acre, which was in line with the future land use map consistency. And then the non-residential density can be a maximum of 10,000 square feet. And that'll be down at the marina area concentrated there in the purple, and that's on that master development plan. So while there is an overall 4.2 acres per units per acre, when you go further down, so area B where the condos are going to be concentrated, that's going to be closer to like 35 units per acre, just by the sheer number of units in that 4-acre area. And then as you move out, it's going to be less dense so that the area C, the residential village areas in the orange, it's going to be less than 1 unit per acre as you calculate it out. So as you move further closer to the marina, it will be, more concentrated. But as you move closer to the residential itself, outside of Indigo Plantation, it'll be much less dense for the acreage. And we've gone through these before. Here are dimensional requirements for each area. So we've got a 3,200 square foot minimum lot area for our single family cluster areas that are going to be in that northern area above 9th Street. In the residential village area. And then that also goes up to, the multifamily dwellings are gonna have, lot areas of at least 10,000 square feet. We kind of get an idea of how they're gonna be on it. Their structure setbacks, they're reducing those, the front yards will be 10, side yards are gonna be 5, and then the rear yards are gonna be 10. And that's, across the board until you get to the non-residential with the front. Front is gonna be 1 foot, and then the side and rear will be 10 feet. So this is the cluster zone area I'm talking about. That's gonna be the maximum height, 35 feet, and 2,500 square feet is this maximum floor area for the unit itself. And those are gonna be your 3,200 square foot lots. And then next, slide shows that this green parcels are what they're calling the city parcels, and the red is the marina parcel for some of their determinations of some of these different dimensional standards, and then they go through also this is the parking. I did reach out and got further clarification and asked them to define junior and non-junior so that we all are on the same page, because we had talked about certain things. So they have now defined a junior accessory dwelling unit is any unit that is less than 500 square feet. And then the non-junior is anything over 500 square feet. And we, Sharon, you spoke that they were considering a traffic study, or I'm sorry, might have been by Sharon, that they were going to go to a parking study at the marina area that shows that they could have reduced parking once they get their own engineer showing that the use and how people are going to be using the area. I believe they're anticipating most of the people using this property are going to be coming from within the development. So they're going to be biking, walking, or golf carts rather than full cars coming in. But it's open to the public as well. They do outline their landscaping and buffers. There's no landscape or buffer between common boundaries between the parcels, and that's existing in our current UDO for any kind of development anyway. But there is a 30-foot wide buffer yard for any locations that are outlined on the green. So if any of the properties that have that green border, they will have that 30-foot buffer yard. And also then this also goes into their open space. The 20% open space will be provided, and then we're calculating the wetlands, floodplain areas, and the marina basin. And then they're also saying that the open space is going to be privately owned. And then no public open space will be required from the project. And then except as described in section 11 of the provisions of UDO, the change should not be applicable to this property. That is the where they have to have the contiguous open space. So they can have it as not.
Question about,
Yes.
on the open space, they've delineated how many acres of land. That's
Yes,
there,
they
right?
have.
What percentage of the open space that they're asking for are like, no?
I do not know off the top of my head. Let me get that for you for your next meeting. I'm gonna have to provide that.
So they're privately owned.
Yes.
They're not open to the public, so there's no public.
Facilities part of that, correct?
Okay. And that could be because they're.
They're right.
Yeah.
Now, I know that in the larger portion that was approved by the county, they did speak that the open space trails that they'll be creating within that parcel will be open to the public. So people can come and use any of their trailways that they have there. I do know that.
It's a little bothersome to me that, and I think this was one of the things, it was either it's in a bill last year or maybe one of the bills this year, that developers are going to be able to consistently use wetlands in their space calculations.
I'm not aware of that. It must be last year.
Maybe so.
I'm not seeing any of the bills this year.
Because I remember thinking that it diminishes
Right.
what CAMA has long established and,
And just the benefits of providing the open space itself.
yes.
That is really all I have for the proposal itself, so I just wanted to open this up to questions that you may have. Again, this will be a recommendation that you will give to the Board of Aldermen. They'll have a public hearing, and then they will make their final decision on this, like any other zoning. Map amendment.
In the permitted uses,
Yes, ma'am.
we've got that, we've already, it's inserted in here for the CC-1.
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything that they proposed? I just went through and looked at what's in PUD now, because we're on, all we're talking
Right.
about that we
Right.
have purview over is that 47.61 acres, actually in the city limits. So was there anything in what they included in that table, Mo, that gave you any heartburn about any changes that bothered you?
There were no changes that bothered me. There were some changes, differences between what a PUD will allow and what this new conditional zoning would allow, but what they have included is not going to be a really high intent commercial project or use rather, so that it would fit in with the overall harmony of the community itself. So they're adding the adult daycare for one, commercial recreation outdoors, so they're talking about trying to get an exercise facility that may include some of those outdoor recreational things. They did remove the veterinary and the fuel and light, so they removed that completely, so that was not included in the. They also included a hospital and institutional care facility that is not in the PUD. They will allow food trucks, water transportation, including docks and tugboats, barges and excursions, was added as not in the PUD. Those would be, and research and development, those would be allowed, that aren't allowed in the PUD itself.
Can you just explain on page 48 in this table?
Mhm.
It has government use, city of Southport.
Yes, ma'am.
What is that? What would that be?
That would be if the city wanted to come in and have a building. If they needed anything for utilities that could come in, so that the city can come in and add needed on property that they own and build. Or have
And we would have,
facilities that they
and
need.
we would have authority, for lack of a better word, to do that. To
Yes.
go in and do
That's
that
correct.
when we get that pointed
Yes.
out. Okay. And I noticed in the PUD, before, there was no maritime sales, rental and service, but that's permitted here.
I
Micro,
missed that.
it's on page 50
Yeah, I got
on
it.
there,
Yes.
okay? Microbreweries. Like we need another one, right?
We have too many.
We're in your town and don't finish. That's what we are. Yeah, we're in town that don't fish.
And the research and development, describe what that is. That was obviously it's not
Right.
in PUD before.
To me, in a situation this would be more like maybe someone, excuse me, like a school coming in, having a research facility at the water, or using a portion of one of their buildings to have a lab. They could come in and
Okay,
take samples and things of the water.
and obviously we pointed out before, no short-term rentals, in this area. That particular area, it's taken out from that. Okay, I just wanted to get examples of things.
Sure, absolutely.
Again, just putting things on record for folks to be able to understand. Anybody else? with questions.
But
Go
that's
ahead,
it.
yes, sir.
On the research,
Yeah,
that part of it, has that ever been discussed? Have they ever said what the intent of that is, rather than just saying, we'd like this?
they don't. I don't know if there's, I don't even know if there are any considerations at this point. I can ask if there are,
Or
absolutely.
if someone's asking for something that's changed,
Right,
I'd like to know the intent behind it.
Sure.
Could you also, because if they're thinking, I think you mentioned about marina research, that would be great.
Sure.
In high schools and UNCW, but
right,
well, then shouldn't it be just say environmental research and that?
sure.
It's a thought.
As opposed to like nuclear weapon research.
Well, you know, I never know with robotics nowadays.
Well, I think it's a legitimate question.
Anybody else? Questions?
Parking. So I think we kind of talked about this before. Quick look was the parking, the number of spots are considerably fewer than what we would require
Correct.
in a
Yes.
different location. And I understand that there's, you know, people expect to walk or bike
Right.
and things like that, but what, do we have an opportunity to get more detailed information for approval on parking? Because the density gets tighter as you get closer to the
Sure,
marina, which
sure.
is where all the commercial and all the vehicles go. You know, it just sounds like it's a dead end type of, you know, three-point turn, come back kind of situation. And if we can maybe get some clarity on that, we might feel better.
I agree that the tighter it gets and we can, it sounds really great to say everybody's gonna bike from
Right,
inside the
of course.
development and ride their golf carts, but, which will still have to be parked somewhere.
Sure.
But I agree, the tighter you get down in there is, and folks are coming from outside too, where they gonna go.
Right.
Parking always seems to come up in every conversation.
Ironically, they've got parking lots that are redeveloping.
Exactly. Anybody else?
Madam Chair, I just have a quick question, just a clarification. My understanding is that there's be no short-term rental units in this. I think you stated that before, right, in this project. On page 110, they talk about workforce housing. There's a paragraph in there, talks about at least 5% of the rental multifamily units in the project, if any, shall be affordable to households with incomes up to and including 80% of the area median income is published by a federal Department of Housing and Urban Development. Is there a plan for multifamily workforce housing in the project?
They speak of it, but I've not seen a true site plan until we have the preliminary plan of what they're gonna be proposing.
Okay. It just
Yes, they speak of.
doesn't sound like very much.
Right.
And where would it be located?
The multifamily is being proposed in the Marina Village, or I'm sorry. See how I mixed up. In the waterfront village.
It's the orange on the map.
It was the red, no, it's in the red.
I was red,
So
okay, I'm
the
sorry.
marina was purple, the red was the waterfront village, and then the orange was the residential village. So it would be closer to the water and the parking lot that's right off the marina to the left in that area.
Thank you.
Yes, welcome.
Anybody else? Okay,
All right.
thank you. I'm gonna say this again because we went through this before when this CZ proposal came up. And I'll preface it and say, I still believe that conditional zoning is a valuable tool for our town and for any town to have, to have that negotiating ability with a developer to get some cohesive contributions, especially at the scale we're talking about here, obviously. And I still believe we missed our chance before to get this right, before this development came back around to us a second time. So now we're, as I said before, we're forced to chase our tail for what will be, without our leadership acquiescing, a county development. Thereby nothing good gained for Southport out of all of it. And for me, again, from their prior submission and having visited another similar development, which we had the chance to do when this came to us before, what I've read, what I've heard in these meetings, I do see positives out of this. It will be, I am confident, a beautiful, albeit a damn big community with preferred builders. They say that. And I trust them to do that. They have a reputation in all of this too. What we'd be approving is the interior of Waterway, and they've presented design standards that are beyond the county requirements in all this. The development agreement provides annexation guidelines, and it puts development guardrails in place for them. There will be a connection to our community. I'm not talking physical roads, although yes, certainly, but there'll be a stakeholder in Southport this way. And in our comp plan update, we talk about conditional zoning being something that we aspire to, that we want to embrace CZ and smart growth in this town. And I don't think very many people even understood smart growth, the definition, the concept, till we started talking about this a couple of years ago. So we say in our own comp plan, we want to move towards this. And although this shouldn't be the primary consideration, but I understand that it'll be sold to the citizenry this way. It will enlarge Southport's tax base over the build out time. It's not an immediate, here's you many, many buckets of money. It's not going to solve what's going on with Southport's budget management, with the city management. For me, though, those points I've just made enhance, for lack of a better term, the BS of it, just increasing our tax base. Those other things, pulling all those together, to me, make it a better thing than just saying it'll increase our tax base. I don't ever want the city to do anything that's just based on increasing our tax base. That's not the right thing for us to be doing. That's just for me out of all of this. What else does anybody else, what other comments does anybody else have that they want to put out there for this? Anybody?
Well, I'll be the first to say that, and I'll stand by my comment when I made it. CZ is how small communities protect themselves a lot of ways. I cited several examples of towns along the east coast of North Carolina that use it, and they've used it quite well for years. They got ahead of this. We're not ahead of this. We're behind it right now. We should have been ahead of it when it came up, but we didn't take that direction. And now we're playing catch up. But a lot of these other successful communities had it before all of this started. And they were able to control quite a bit of what was going on because these people had to go above and beyond to develop in that area under the CZ standards. So,
And they willingly took it on to do that.
yeah,
And I think that's, we talked about that before, and it's important to say again, it would be the developer's option to take this route, understanding that if it goes in this direction,
yeah,
we're gonna be
they have,
in better control
Yeah.
of things, absolutely. Larry, you were looking at me.
Yeah. I'm just, it reminds me of that Chevy commercial where the husband comes home with two new cars, one's silver, one's red, and the husband really wants a silver one, and that's his intent. All of a sudden, she picks the silver one, and he goes, well, I like red. And it shows how people can change their mind. I think the difficulty I'm having is the powers that be that engineered this whole process have been completely quiet on it, that they've not come out and said, this is what we like, this is what we've done, this is when we've been doing it, this is who has been doing it. Instead, it was handed over to us quietly, like a midnight package, in my view. And yet, the Board of Aldermen and the mayor still yet to come out and publicly state, we made a mistake. And I think that's really a bad management practice, because I agree, everybody can change their minds when you've got the facts, but I think to not come out and state that, I think is just doing the citizenry wrong by not at least saying that.
And I noticed in our packet, somewhere, and Mo, maybe you can help clarify this, it looks like the submission came in City Hall March the 12th. I'm remembering that date without going back to that. But it was signed earlier than that.
The additional zoning application itself for the project, additional zoning rezoning, came in March 6th with the intent of doing a text amendment. They had the text amendment language in that package, but not the full application. So they had to resubmit with the full application.
And then, and don't throw anything at me, the fee for it wasn't paid until the day of our planning board meeting.
It was submitted with the application at the time of the application.
But it wasn't
It was-
taken in by the city
That's correct.
until the
That's
day
correct.
of the planning.
But we were also getting changes to everything, so until that was full and ready to go, we wanted to make sure.
So if I could, Madam Chair,
Mhm.
just from a procedural standpoint, so I understand it, again, not putting you on the spot, but I just want to make sure I understand it. When a package is complete, does that include acceptance of the fee, or is it before that and then the fee gets charged after the fact?
The fee is part of the submittal, so the fee is brought in with the application.
Don't understand that, but when is it considered complete when the fee is actually, when the check is cashed?
No,
So you could actually sit on a check.
but we would not. I mean.
No, I understand that, but I'm trying to understand the procedure that if you receive an application and you haven't cashed the check, is it still considered a complete application?
Yes,
Okay, so the monetary part is just inconsequential really when it comes down to the acceptance of the application.
as long as it is submitted at the time of the application.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. That helps.
Larry, I'll touch on something you mentioned about how it was handled. I know in the past, in your presentation, you mentioned that, well, in a sense, CZ is now right because circumstances has changed, but you all thought CZ
Oh,
was
yes.
right back in 2023, 2024. And the most telling sign, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you said that for the 2023 text amendment, that was drafted by staff, right?
Yeah.
This text amendment was drafted by the developer.
Correct.
That shows the difference of who has leverage,
Yes.
in my mind, but, okay. Sorry, I had to say that.
Well, and that is important to bring up, and it's true. We were trying to be proactive before, And now we have no choice but to be reactive in this. We, as a town. And not, again, not that I don't think it'll be a great development, because I do. That other city within our city. But it's kind of, we have our collective backed up against the wall in all of this. I mean, because we've been told those benefits won't come, that tax base won't come unless you agree to what we put out here for you. And they have a right to do that, obviously, in this, but I just wish we had had more, that it had been set up then, so that we would have had more play, more, a bigger chair at the table, rather than being put in the small chairs at the kiddie table, if you want to look at it that way. I just wish it had worked out differently before, but it was a
Well, you know,
very different time.
the thing is, the city would have been a year and a half ahead.
Yes.
The developer would have been a year and a half ahead. The lots would have been, the infrastructure probably would have already been in. The city might have already started receiving tax money from this development. Instead, bad decisions have led us to coming to good decisions.
I believe if this had been put in place before, and as I think it was Bonnie there said, coulda, woulda, shoulda, move on. I think if it had been put in place before, I believe they would have come back with this plan earlier. And yes, we would have already negotiated all of this out before the legislation that took the ETJ. I believe that
I agree with
would
you.
have been the course that we would have already, that we'd be through with all those conversations. And you're right,
Yeah.
that hard as it would be for people to see, that infrastructure would already being put in place. And their marketing would be well underway for all of this. So it's shame on us for not getting this done to make this a better thing for Southport.
Well, I'm feeling optimistic about the process. Hopefully, the conditional zoning will come into play. Be official. I'm feeling optimistic about the development. It's going to be a major change for Southport. It's coming no matter what. I'm feeling positive about it. I think the CZ will come into play for some other future developments, some significant parcels of land. So it's going to be interesting to see what the rest of the process is with the public and the aldermen. And it seems like a brainer, but not the way it always goes.
And I remember too, when they initially submitted for this development, after our planning board did the exhaustive work that it did on that submission when it came in, and the developer was really patient and worked well with us through all that, answering our questions, even when it's not time for us to do that. It was good things to point out to them as they were reworking this actually. But in the planning board's presentation, when we did our report on that, the very first thing out of my mouth was, anybody that thinks this development is not coming to Southport is delusional. We said that years ago to say they have a right to develop over that, where the size of it is, you know, minimally at that time, it was 400 single family houses that they could have done. But we've said all along, this thing's coming, prepare yourself, folks. Yes, it looks different now because they can. And like I say, I wish we had had a bigger place in it, but I'm optimistic too, Fred, that we're finally figuring out and at a position to be able to say, this is the right thing. The CZ establishing that is a good planning tool for us to have and for developers to be able to access in all of it.
When this was negotiated, or when they started looking at it earlier, can you refresh my memory? I wasn't on the board, but how many units were negotiated, I guess, or talked about, and somehow I heard 900, and I'm trying to remember what the maximum number of units, when there was some back and forth with the developer. Do you remember it all?
Mo, do you remember that in thetheir original
In
submission?
the original submittal, it's one complete package. I believe it was around 1,500.
1548.
1548.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. And I appreciate staff not ripping the hair out, having been down this road before and sticking with it. Thank you.
I think they were as shell shocked as we were. Mo's smiling again, at least now. So we're glad for that. Anybody else?
What's next steps?
Well, we've talked about here this morning some suggested revisions to this text. We need to decide if we're going to actually forward those suggestions that the UDO review committee looked at and talked with staff about. Was that yesterday? Just yesterday? And guys, I will tell you, thank you for that intense work already on that, and it's a stopgap measure to help make this better. And I appreciate you working on this. But I think that's a basis to craft a report with some suggested text changes for the alderman's consideration, to take back to the developer to see how that would even go. I mean, there may be a really hard stop on anything, but all we can do is ask, right? Understanding though that these would be suggestions only, because the alderman can and certainly might refuse again to even consider them. But we're supposed to do our job and make recommendations we know to be worthy of their considerations in this. And I want us to remember too that we do have another option. We can kiss off basically on what's been presented to us and forward that on to the alderman and let it go from there. I don't think we're doing due diligence to do that. But we certainly have that option. Get this through and then come back and make the changes that we've talked about doing today and others, because literally as soon as it goes into the UDO, we can open it right back up again, right? And make other changes. But why take that extra step if we know what we're talking about here is the right thing to do, right?
Inquiry. Larry and John did fantastic work yesterday, the review committee. And why don't we have a committee convene at the end and do those based upon what's been stated today, what's comments of everyone at the table, and then just have a deadline, because when's our report due? It's 30 days from.
We will put our recommendation, forward our recommendation at our next regular meeting, the 15th. I'm losing track myself, so
So,
Yeah.
Larry and John, it's on we can meet next week
yes,
and crank it out.
that's what I was gonna suggest. You want,
This was a UDO text amendment, not the application.
yes, the conditional zoning, the text amendment for CZ, okay? So I'm gonna ask you, I kind of wrote this motion out already. Can I get a motion to authorize our UDO review committee to formalize its revision suggestions for the submitted CZ text amendment, bringing it back for final discussion along with the rezoning application submitted by East West and Ballhead to be placed into recommendation form at our May meeting?
Which would be the 15th.
Mhm.
So moved.
Second.
Will, and it's a second. Thank y'all for that. Motion is on the floor. Any final discussion? All in favor?
If there's any, if anybody has any remarks or points to forward to the committee for consideration, they would have the opportunity to do that.
Absolutely.
And three of us, John, Larry, myself, whatever emails convenient, phone call.
Yep.
Absolutely. Any other discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank y'all for that.
That counts as overtime, right?
Overtime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Double pay.
Yeah.
Double pay.
Yeah. Let's send that to the alderman for the regular expenses right now, right? Okay, yeah. I want to thank everybody that attended from the public and the members here at the table for your valued work. And now with no other discussion, do I hear a motion that we adjourn?
And I'll second.
Thank you, Larry. Appreciate it. Motion's on the floor. Any final discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. We are adjourned at 11:39. Have a good day, folks. Good weekend.
Email me whenever you want to.